What will happen?
During a drive through the mountains, Elizabeth awakens from a dream about encountering a remarkable man who would introduce her to a hidden realm just for them. That man is her husband, Dr. Henry Kellenberg, who is at the wheel. Upon arriving at his home, Henry introduces her to his servant, Claire Stratton, and his blind son, Oliver. They enjoy an extravagant dinner before heading to their bedroom for their first night as a married couple. The following morning, Henry gives Elizabeth a tour of the extensive house, highlighting the numerous rooms, each equipped with a unique thumbprint lock that recognizes both of them. However, there's one room she must not enter, and Henry insists she promise not to before they engage in intimate activities right there in the hallway, which Claire witnesses. Later, Henry informs her he must leave early for work. The next day, Claire approaches Elizabeth about lunch, which prompts Elizabeth to inquire about Henry's background after spotting his Nobel Prize. Claire admits she doesn't have an answer. That night, Elizabeth notices Claire and Oliver sneaking out of the house. Unable to sleep, Elizabeth decides to investigate the forbidden room. Inside, she discovers a laboratory filled with peculiar machines and is horrified to find a body that looks just like her within one of them. Panic-stricken, she rushes out, accidentally cutting her finger on a tray. After bandaging her finger, she attempts to make a call, but the phone is dead. Eventually, she falls asleep and wakes up late the next day. Feeling uneasy around Henry, Elizabeth shares her phone troubles, to which he responds that it's common for phones in that area to malfunction. He inquires about her finger, and she brushes it off as an accident before they retreat to their bedroom to spend the day in bed together. Elizabeth finds no joy in this and ends up in tears. Later that night, as Henry gets out of bed, Elizabeth follows him. Just as she reaches the stairs, he catches her and warns her that she will be punished for disobedience. He then brandishes a machete and chases her through the house. Elizabeth tries to escape, but the locks no longer recognize her thumbprint. She hides in the wine cellar, and when Henry checks for her there and finds nothing, he leaves to wait in the living room. When Elizabeth emerges, she finds the living room deserted. Armed with a fire poker, she attempts to go upstairs, only to be caught by Henry, who drags her down and prepares to kill her with a machete. The following morning, Claire and Oliver assist Henry in burying Elizabeth's body in the woods. They share breakfast together as if they were equals, but Claire urges Henry to cease these actions before he attracts suspicion, which he dismisses. Later, Henry receives a visit from his friend Frank Logan, a detective. After claiming that Elizabeth is resting, Henry inquires about Frank's troubles, and Frank reveals concerns about his department facing investigation for bribery. Though he has been spared, some colleagues haven't, and he will need to testify against them. Henry coldly suggests that it's better to be the one inflicting pain than to be the victim, leaving Frank unsettled. Meanwhile, Claire is writing in her journal when Oliver interrupts, presenting her with flowers. Claire declines and asks him to stop bringing gifts. Oliver questions why she stays with Henry if she's unhappy, and Claire replies she has knowledge that compels her to stay. Oliver thinks it's love that keeps her there. After dismissing him, Claire takes her medication. 6 weeks later, while driving through the mountains again, Elizabeth awakens from another dream about finding a brilliant man to share a secret world with. This time, her wedding dress is different, but the same pattern unfolds. Henry introduces her to his family, gives her a tour of the house while Claire watches from a distance, insists she won't enter the forbidden room, and after dinner and dancing, they spend their first night together as a married couple. Before drifting off, Henry mentions he'll need to leave for work soon. Again unable to sleep, Elizabeth ventures to the kitchen, where she finds Claire smoking. Elizabeth expresses her desire to learn more about Claire, but their conversation is interrupted by Henry, who takes her back to bed. The next morning, Elizabeth wakes up alone in the house. After exploring for a bit, she succumbs to curiosity and enters the forbidden room. There, she encounters the replica of herself in the machine and flees, but this time the capsule opens and the duplicate emerges, pursuing her. The copy finds Elizabeth asleep, and after confirming that Claire and Oliver are gone, touches her face and lifts her pajama top. The following day, Elizabeth wakes up at noon again, noticing her clothes have been disturbed. When Henry finds her and asks about her well-being, she heads to the bathroom to wash up. As Henry attempts to follow Elizabeth, she struggles to keep the bathroom door closed, but he forces his way in and grabs a towel. When he accuses her of disobedience, she tries to escape, but he quickly tackles her and begins to choke her with the towel. After a fierce struggle, Elizabeth manages to kick him away and run, only to discover the exit door's lock won't accept her thumbprint. With the windows unbreakable, she races to the kitchen to grab some knives, while Henry prepares a cloth soaked in anesthetic. Henry then heads to the living room to play the piano and leaves a recording of himself playing, creating the illusion that he's still there. This trick works. Elizabeth, thinking it's safe, leaves her hiding place in the kitchen. However, Henry sneaks up behind her and presses the cloth over her nose and mouth. She fights against him until she succumbs to unconsciousness, but it turns out to be a strategic ploy to catch him off guard. Regaining her senses, she quickly stabs Henry with a hidden weapon, killing him. They both collapse to the floor, and as Henry bleeds out, Elizabeth succumbs to the anesthetic and falls asleep. Hours later, Elizabeth awakens and drags Henry's lifeless body to the door, attempting to use his fingers to unlock it, but it doesn't work. She then cleans up the scene, covering Henry's body with his jacket to conceal it, takes a shower, removes her wedding ring, and burns her blood-stained pajamas. Later, while napping on the couch, she is jolted awake by Henry's ringing phone, which displays numerous missed calls from Claire. Elizabeth calls 911, explaining that she is locked in her house but struggles to provide her address. Just as she's about to give more details, Claire and Oliver return home, prompting her to hang up and pretend to have been reading. Claire and Oliver are startled to find Elizabeth there, even more so when she mentions that Henry is upstairs sleeping. This revelation makes Claire anxious, and she barely steps into the kitchen before suffering a heart attack. In her panic, she manages to call 911 before losing consciousness, and an ambulance soon arrives. Elizabeth seizes this moment to escape, but Oliver stops her, insisting that if she leaves, he cannot protect her from the police. He knows Henry is dead and believes Claire's claim of acting in self-defense, even reciting the secret phrase from Elizabeth's dream before asking her to show him where the body is. Together, they transport Henry's body to the incinerator. During this, Oliver asks Elizabeth about her past. She reveals she spent a lot of time in the hospital as a child after losing her parents in a car accident and grew up in an orphanage. Oliver explains that her memories are tied to a nearby house where he and Claire stay. She lived there until she was 8. He further reveals that she has been cooked in the Forbidden Room, being one of 6 genetically identical copies created from Henry's late wife, Elizabeth, who died during Oliver's birth due to a rare strain of Werner syndrome. When Oliver sees Frank's car approaching, he quickly shares crucial advice on how to handle the situation. When Frank arrives, she tells him Henry is napping because he's unwell. While Oliver fetches water, Frank expresses concern for Elizabeth after hearing about her 911 call. When Oliver returns, he falsely claims it was Claire who called after her heart attack, and Elizabeth agrees. As they talk, Frank notes the peculiar health issues affecting everyone in the house: Elizabeth's sleep disorder, Claire's heart condition, Oliver's blindness, and Henry's apparent illness. Just then, Frank collapses dead after Oliver shoots him with a rifle. Oliver explains to Elizabeth that Henry had been bribing Frank since he discovered another clone of Elizabeth 3 years ago, whom Henry had also killed, just like all the others. After Elizabeth turned 8, she was returned to the tank, resulting in a gap in her memories. She was only brought out for therapy and to implant memories, which helped tailor her personality. Elizabeth, overwhelmed, asks to know no more about the experiments. They take Henry's body to the incinerator, after which Oliver instructs her to gather clothes and money from the safe to facilitate her escape. Before she can leave, he asks her to read Claire's journal for critical information, then locks her in until she finishes. With little choice, Elizabeth begins reading, uncovering how everything started. It details Henry's significant advancements in cell research that made him a billionaire, leading him to invite Claire to work for him 5 years prior. Claire initially refused due to ethical concerns, but Henry convinced her by offering a unique scientific opportunity. He revealed he had cloned his deceased wife, Elizabeth, extracting DNA to create 6 identical copies. While Elizabeth reads the journal, Oliver interrupts her with food. He apologizes for locking her up, insisting they are on the same side. Elizabeth resumes reading the journal. It details how, after paying off Frank, Henry and Claire continued their experiments. They buried the 3rd Elizabeth in the woods and returned to their research. After 6 months of fruitless combinations, Henry was losing hope. In a moment of vulnerability, Claire spent the night with him, but afterward, he suggested shutting down the machines, which Claire disagreed with. Claire ended the affair upon realizing she could never replace Elizabeth, as Henry often reminisced about her. When she asked what he truly desired, he confessed that he wanted to relive his wedding night. Claire was initially resistant, but ultimately aided in bringing Elizabeth to life. She hinted that Oliver might be Henry's clone, to which Henry admitted he feared Elizabeth might prefer the young boy over his older self. This revelation disturbs Elizabeth, prompting her to set the journal aside. After 2 days, Oliver wakes her up, holding scissors to her neck with a bleeding hand. Elizabeth provides him with the information he seeks. Claire suspected he was a clone, but Henry showed her the birth certificate. Confused, Oliver backs away, but Elizabeth senses his feelings for her and convinces him to come closer, promising they can be together. When he approaches, she shoves him away, takes the scissors and the key to her chains, and demands the real door code. As she kicks him in frustration, they are interrupted by the 6th clone of Elizabeth, who enters wearing a wedding dress and holding a rifle. This clone, believing Oliver to be Henry, orders Elizabeth 5 to drop to the floor. In the chaos, Elizabeth 5 recovers the scissors and stabs Oliver in the leg. As she tries to hold him hostage, Elizabeth VI shoots him, killing him and injuring Elizabeth V in the process. Elizabeth V flees the room and correctly enters the door code to escape, but as soon as she steps outside, Elizabeth VI shoots her again. Before dying, Elizabeth V urges her to read Claire's journal to discover the truth. After washing up and changing clothes, Elizabeth VI reads the journal over breakfast. The entries recount the night Henry murdered Elizabeth IV, which Claire heard. Instead of explaining, Henry told Claire he had revised her contract and transferred all his assets to her, enabling her to continue her research. In the present, Claire returns from the hospital and encounters Elizabeth at the door, who has packed her bag. Elizabeth hands Claire the journal, stating she's earned the house and money and should use it wisely. With that, Elizabeth departs, finally free from the constraints imposed upon her. If you enjoyed this recap, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe.